The Conservative government faced a fresh round of criticism and question period today over their treatment of veterans and Minister Julian Fantino's performance on the job. Our MP panel is here with their view from Parliament Hill. Aaron O'Toole, a Conservative MP from Ontario, and a veteran himself, Ginny Sims, NDP MP from British Columbia, and Yvonne Jones, a Liberal MP from Newfoundland and Labrador. Aaron, I'm going to start with you, not just because you're the government MP here, but because you're a veteran yourself. When you look at how your government has handled this file, when you hear from somebody like Mark Campbell, who's not a political guy, who is fighting the government, do you feel that there are major changes that need to be made?
Well, Mercedes, whenever I see someone like Major Campbell, a veteran who's frustrated with the government, I hate seeing that. But we also have to look at what the Equitas court case is about, because there actually hasn't been a real discussion of what the sacred obligation they're talking about is. What the court case, and it's early filings, there was no initial decision yet, it's just allowed to proceed. They're trying to say that the obligation to veterans, which is a critical one, everyone agrees with that, is on par with the sort of constitutional duties that the First Nations of Canada has. And that's not the case. And the sacred obligation quote itself comes from Prime Minister Borden, who visited troops in World War I and was profoundly moved, my favorite PM, and he talked about that obligation. I think every MP thinks there's that profound obligation, but it's not the same as constitutional rights that First Nations have in the way that their court cases suggest.
One of the things that they're asking for is they want a pension. They don't want this new veterans charter, which is a lump sum, and yes, you can now take your lump sum over time. It's not the same as a pension. They're arguing that many of them would have seen a lot more money under a pension. You're talking about less than $300,000 if you lose every limb. And this isn't just a problem for the Conservatives. The NDP, the Liberals, everybody signed off on this new veterans charter. Is that something you think the Liberals and the NDP could get behind and say, look, what if we all come at this together and say this isn't a political issue, it's about how our veterans are treated? Ginny, is this something that can be depoliticized for the sake of the veterans?
I think it has to be depoliticized, and I think that all parties need to get to the table and find a way of ratcheting down the rhetoric right now. As a Canadian, I feel kind of ashamed at times when I listen to veterans like the one we've just heard from and others, that we've come to this stage. I've always believed, and maybe it's my naivety, I don't think it is, that when we ask people to go to war on our behalf, to risk their life and limb, that we do have a covenant with them. And that covenant is we're going to look after them or their families. And their families. And in this case, when people lose limbs or are disabled due to mental issues as well, due to stress, I feel that we are right now failing our veterans. It's not just something I hear in the House of Commons. I actually talk to veterans, and I talk to Canadians who tell me, Ginny, this cannot be happening in my Canada. That's the kind of words they are using. And I myself was really kind of embarrassed when I read the words. And I read the article last night, the quote that, oh, those were just political speeches. Well, if they're just political speeches, then we as politicians have absolutely no right to ask men and women in this country to risk their life and limb and go overseas on wars that we vote on.
Absolutely.
And we do that, and yet then to turn around and say those are political speeches, I think it's unconscionable. For me, in an ideal world, let's all sit down at the table and let's come up with something that's real, that addresses the needs. And we do have a sacred covenant with those who go to war on our behalf. And I think we have to live up to that.
I want to give Yvonne a chance to get in here too.
Well, first of all, when you have a government that can stand in the House of Commons and say they have a sacred duty to veterans in this country, but then put government boots to battle in the courtroom and feel no sense of moral obligation to our veterans, that's where we have a huge problem in this country. The willingness of all parliamentarians to come together, I think that is there. However, at the same time, it's government that will make the decision. final decision at the end of the day. And the decisions that we have seen thus far have not been in favor of veterans. It has not been respectful of the duty that they have performed on behalf of Canadians. And in my opinion, the statements that they've made in recent days tells me that they feel no moral obligation to those who stand to fight for our country.
Aaron, do you
and
feel
that is
a moral
absolutely
obligation?
shameful.
Absolutely. And I've worked my whole adult life on these issues, either in uniform or after. What Yvonne is not saying is the new Veterans Charter was created by the last Liberal government. And all parties agreed, including the Veterans Advocate and the NDP, agreed on the moves because it was bringing forward health. The lump sum was something a lot of veterans were asking for, but our Veterans Affairs Minister and our government have made changes already. So in some cases, veterans will be better off under the new Veterans Charter system because it's not just the lump sum, Mercedes. There's the permanent impairment allowance and supplements for the most critically injured veterans. Those are payments that we increased a few years ago. There's more support for not just the veteran, but also their families. So there are positive parts to the new Veterans Charter. What Minister Fantino and the Veterans Affairs Committee did on an all-party basis is they came up with 14 recommendations to fix the Charter. We've already made changes to increase payments to people like Major Campbell, who will have a hard time transitioning to civilian life. But there's more we can do. All parties agreed on the 14 changes, and you're going to see them implemented. But let's not lose sight of the fact that the new Veterans Charter was created by the Liberals. We've improved it twice already, and we're committed to making sure that it treats veterans even better because there's better health care, there's better training, there's better education than the old Pension Act.
When something doesn't work, what the veterans have seen over the last number of years, they've seen their Veteran Affairs offices being shut down. They're finding that they're having to wait longer for services. Those who need counseling and need help with mental health issues are not getting the support. They're finding they're being sort of retired, so to speak, out of service just before they qualify for the pensions. We're not talking about one thing, we're talking about a number of things. And the 14 points in the Charter, the government has not embraced them all or implemented them all. And I think as legislators, our prime responsibility is when we know something is broken, it's not working,
well, and let's
then to
hope
fix it.
that all three of the political parties can come together. I'm going to change gears just because I want to talk about something Justin Trudeau has said, something that Tom Mulcair is talking about as well, and that's gun control and these new gun laws that the Conservatives are talking about bringing in. Mr. Mulcair is promising to bring back the gun registry. He says without some of the problems. Justin Trudeau has been up in the House of Commons, Yvonne, talking about this quite a bit. He faced some criticism. People said he didn't understand how firearms were transported. Where does your party stand on this particular piece of legislation, and would you bring back gun control in the way that the Conservatives got rid of it?
First of all, Mr. Trudeau has been very clear. We will not be bringing back the gun registry. He's made that statement time and time again. He continues to make that statement, and that's the policy under which he will govern. However, with regard to the changes that's being proposed right now before the House of Commons, I think it's fair to say that there is a couple of good points in the legislation. For example, the combining of things like fire possession and fire acquisition. I have 2 cards right now in my wallet. I should only have 1. It's things like that that just make sense. What's in this bill that does not make sense and really concerns me is that we're removing the powers from the RCMP and giving it to government politicians. And I have a significant issue with that. We have the RCMP in this country for a reason. They have a mandated purpose, and part of the purpose they have is with regard to gun control, the monitoring, the licensing, the authorization, and I don't think those powers should be removed.
We just have about a minute yet, so I've got to move to Ginny. Ginny, why do you want to bring it back?
Well, absolutely, our leader has been very, very clear. We're not bringing back the boondoggle that the Liberals created and that was decimated by the Conservative Party. What he has said is we've got to find a way to track the firearms, because it actually does help the police. At no times are we saying we're going to bring back the gun registry that existed, but we know, and we're hearing this from citizens, there are dangerous weapons out there, and our RCMP needs to be involved and make sure that we come up with a tracking system that isn't the boondoggle it was, but actually does serve the purpose.
Aaron, we just have a few minutes left. Why not bring it back?
Well, clearly it was focused at the wrong people. You know, law-abiding hunters, anglers, you know, farmers. It was not contributing to any of the crackdown on crime at all. What we're doing is focusing on keeping firearms out of the hands of dangerous people. In fact, the bill coming forward will ensure that anybody with domestic violence backgrounds will never have access. It's about responsibility with respect to ownership. It's sad that it's a tragedy brought up to speak about a bill like this in a way that misrepresents the bill just to try and score some points. What we're doing is actually cracking down on crime, cracking down on violence against women. Most of it is opposed by these parties, and you know, I think it's been a good balance. Some of our measures are seeing the crime rate reduce.
I'm sure there will be much more debate on this to come.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much to our MPs. We'll have you back for more on that. Absolutely.